think we are ready to start. Welcome again to our webinar Product Compliance Update 2024. My name is Nathalie Gessel, and I will give you a few opening notes about IPOINT and the webinar today before I then hand it over to today's experts. Next slide, please. So just a few notes and the session overview. The webinar will take approximately 45 minutes, depending a little bit on how many questions we will have afterwards. This session is being recorded, so all webinar participants are muted. You can, though, put your questions in the chat also already while the experts are talking. And then we will have a Q&A session at the end where we will try to answer all of your questions. The slides are being recorded and the presentation as well, and we will share everything with you afterwards. And also, quick note already, at the end, you will get a Q&R code, and we would love for everyone to give us some feedback on the webinar. You can just scan the code, and then there will be a survey that takes approximately 2 minutes. And yeah, we would really appreciate everyone who takes the time to give us feedback so that we can get better from every webinar. And next slide, please. With that, we also wanted to take a few minutes to give you a better idea of what IPOINT actually does and give everyone the same broad understanding of that. So what you do see here on this slide is kind of IPOINT in a nutshell. We provide companies with business critical software and services to integrate, automate, and unify product compliance and sustainability. Our customers use our software and services for, as you can see here, product compliance, so to ensure full auditable compliance across their whole product portfolio, but also for product sustainability, to calculate, analyze, and report product lifecycle footprints. What we also do is help with process intelligence to build and bring together operational and strategic competencies for both of those areas and integrate them across the entire organization. So with our software and services, we want to empower companies to not only unlock, but also leverage the synergies of bringing together product compliance and sustainability. This is basically what we have been doing for the past 25 years, and this is how we thrive to make businesses fit for the future. Next slide, please. While our solution is industry agnostic, we focus on the automotive, electronic, and manufacturing industries. These industries have common challenges. Those are sectors with many development cycles, companies with complex products and complex supply chains. And also, those complex products have a high number of different input material. And with IPOINT's like early mover and also connected thinking approach, it made us a leader in the industry, working with over 250 enterprise customers and also numerous top-tier suppliers and manufacturers. And with that, I hope that everyone has at least the same basic understanding of IPOINT and our business. And on the next slide, I will now introduce you to my IPOINT colleagues and our expert speakers for today. So we do have Yogita and Shivangi, both regulatory compliance experts, and also Peter, our products compliance expert. And yeah, with that, I will already hand it over to Peter, who will kick off the session for today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining. We only have about 45 minutes to cover a whole year, so we won't cover everything in a great deal of depth, but we've been looking back at the year and looking forward to next year, and we have what we believe are key topics for both this year and for the future. So I will be starting with a quick look back at the year so far, and then Yogita will be covering PFAS, and in particular the new Canadian PFAS legislation, which has a very urgent timeline. And Shivangi will cover the material compliance view of the new revised battery regulation. It's a lot more extensive than we can cover today, but it's there. A quick update on EU POP, and then I will round off the session at the end with a look forward to 2025 and beyond. And without going any further, I'd like to pass over to Yogita. No, I won't. I'll stay where I am. So let's put next slide, please. So while everybody's still joining, I have a quick question, and hopefully most of you know this, that what do Julia Roberts and Mark Ruffalo have in common with material compliance? The answer is, and next slide, please, for those who did not know, is that they both starred in movies highlighting material compliance issues. Hexavalent chromium, one of the most nasty things to protect steel out there, was the subject of Erin Brockovich, a Julia Roberts movie in 2000. And Mark Ruffalo starred in Dark Waters in 2019, which covered PFAS. And these movies and other media things have helped with public awareness of serious compliance issues. Next slide, please. Many of the material compliance issues we face today have taken a similar path. Somebody has identified the issue, then they've checked the science, and then in many cases people wait for increased public awareness, and then the legislation follows to either ban, restrict, or control these substances is made or improved, such as the EU battery regulation, which is an improvement over last time. Many other legislation in Europe is going through its second or third revision. And hopefully this will all be followed up by product improvements, the sort of thing that your audience are working on every day. And next slide, please. So taking a quick look back at 2024. Next slide, please. EU ROS. EU ROS is still going along as it was. There have been lots of rumors about additional substances, which still aren't quite there. Version 3 never appeared and has been delayed again. And as before, exemption extensions are continuing. They are still behind schedule, but people are starting to catch up. Under REACH SVHC, for the first time in 5 or 6 years, ECHA have done 3 updates in a single year. The last one was earlier this month. Under the Waste Framework Directive and skip reporting, we can no longer, and nobody can support the new SVHCs immediately. ECHA are unable to add the details necessary for people to create their Euclid dossiers or skip dossiers through our software. And in addition, ECHA are having a lot of issues accepting new data. The thing on the right-hand side there, submissions in pending status, is an error message that's been up on the ECHA website for 6 weeks. It's nearly the end of November, and it does look like it's not resolved yet. But so even if you have done your skip declarations, they may not be in the public portal, the dissemination portal, for some time. Without doubt, the hottest topic for all our customers has been PFAS. And industry and news worldwide, forever chemicals are the topic of the moment. And I'm quite sure you're all fully aware of this. You'll hear a lot more on this later from my colleague Yogita. Conflict minerals, also known as responsible minerals, is moving forward. The pilot reporting template, which has been around for nearly 2 years now, will be renamed the additional material reporting template, which users can use this one or the old PRT. And the EMRT is being extended to include more minerals. It's likely that this will help for you when we get to the EU Critical Materials Act coming up soon, but people are now much more conscious of material supply chains, and it's moving a lot faster now than it has been for some time. Next slide, please. And I will now pass to you, Geeta, and you'll hear more from me later.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today to learn about our favorite topic of the year, PFAS. Next slide, please. Before I jump into the details, let me walk you through the agenda. We will look at the definition of PFAS. Why has there been a need to introduce any regulatory measures? PFAS all around us, and then we take a look at the different regulatory measures in the EU, US, as well as Canada. Next slide, please. So PFAS, or perfluoroalkyl substances, are a group of synthetic chemicals that have been widely used in the industrial and consumer products since the 1940s. As you see in this image, a lot of carbon-fluorine bonds, and this bond is extremely difficult to break. PFAS are divided into long-chain and short-chain PFAS, and naturally the long-chain ones are the most bioaccumulative and persistent in nature. Next, please. So over the last 2 decades, the knowledge of PFAS-related health effects has really exploded. We now know that they're linked with different types of cancer, liver damage, developmental issues, and many more. These chemicals are now being referred to as forever chemicals because they're extremely persistent in the environment and human body. So they can basically stay in soil and water for centuries and keep getting into our system through food and drinking water. Next, please. So there was this mysterious incident actually in Sydney, which caused the closure of several beaches in Sydney, including the famous Bondi Beach. They kept finding these round blobs. They smelled pretty bad, and then they kept trying to understand what these mysterious blobs actually were. Eventually, they figured out that these are actually sticky spears, which were made of different components, a lot of different chemicals, soap scum, but also PFAS, which kind of just goes to show that where all this stuff keeps coming up actually. Next slide, please. So PFAS are everywhere you look because of their water resistance, fire resistance, and stain resistance. So these are often used in food packaging, non-stick cookware, cosmetics, firefighting, and even the automotive industry. Next, please. So if we look just at the uses in automotive, they are being used in coatings and paints like naturally because they're very water and dirt resistant. They're being used in fuel and oil resistant seals. They're even being used in upholstery treatments because they also provide stain resistance, and naturally in wire and cable insulation because they have a very high heat resistance, and they're pretty durable. Next slide, please. So if we look at the scenario in the US right now, 30 states have adopted 155 policies, and 34 states have introduced 292 policies in everyday consumer products or professional firefighting foam. So just to give a few examples, like New Hampshire has enacted laws that bans PFAS in apparel, cleaning products, cookware, cosmetics. States like New York, Maine, California, etc. have restricted or banned PFAS in children's products. And I'm barely scratching the surface here. The map here and the statistics clearly show how the momentum against PFAS has surged in the last years. Earlier this year, US EPA also released new standards limiting PFAS in drinking water. Next, please. So lawmakers in some states have passed measures that require industries to actually pay for testing and even cleanup. They've ordered companies to disclose the use of PFAS in their products and are mandating and also encouraging the development of PFAS alternatives. Next, please. So that was the situation in US. Let's look at what's happening in EU. So in January 2023, authorities from Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden submitted a REACH dossier for a restriction proposal for PFAS in EU to the ECHA. Currently, the Risk Analysis Committee and the Socio-Economic Analysis Committee are carrying out an evidence-based scientific evaluation of this dossier, given the broad scope of the restriction dossier, because it's covering more than 10,000 substances used in over 14 plus sectors. So the committees have decided to take a sector-based approach in their evaluation. Right now, the RSC has reached a provisional conclusion on the hazard assessment of PFAS. And this initial 6-month consultation period that you see in 2023, more than 5,600 scientific and technical comments were received from interested third parties. And this consultation input really helped the dossier submitters to progressively update and improve their information on PFAS. It actually helped them identify uses that were not specifically named in the initial proposal. For example, medical applications such as packaging, excipients for pharmaceuticals, etc. If we look at this timeline, the RSC and SEAC opinions were to be submitted to ECHA by the third quarter of 2024, but as per the most recent progress update report of November 2024, the opinion development work will further progress during 2025. So, I mean, we're looking at an outcome maybe at the end of next year or something like that. Next slide, please. So all of these ongoing analysis and so on has actually helped ECHA realize that maybe alternative restriction options are required besides a full ban. For example, maybe a ban with time-limited derogation. And this consideration is particularly relevant for uses and sectors where evidence suggests that a full ban could lead to disproportionate socioeconomic impacts. So some of these uses that they're considering, not limited to this, but some of these are, let's say, batteries, fuel cells, medical equipment, and electrolyzers. So the proportionality of each alternate option will be evaluated and compared to the two initial restriction options of a full ban or a ban with time-limited derogations. Next, please. This leads us to now get to the newer, more interesting turn that PFAS journey has taken. We learn about what businesses need to know when it comes to the Canadian PFAS. Next slide, please. So earlier in July 2024, Canada Gazette published this notice, which has created this mandatory reporting obligation pursuant to paragraph 71 of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. The deadline of this reporting is actually coming up very close. It's January 29, 2025. Next slide, please. So the essence, let's say, of the Canadian PFAS, it's mainly consisting of 3 lists of specific PFAS substances. List 1, which is called the Part 1 of Schedule 1, Schedule 1 meaning just an annex, let's say, to this notice. List 2 and 3 are Part 2 and 3, respectively, of this Schedule 1. So who is obligated to do this reporting? At first, it's the importers of PFAS or items which have PFAS, like textiles, cookware, firefighting foams, etc. Of course, this reporting obligation when it comes to import depends largely on the import volume of the PFAS, and also depends on in which list exactly your used or your imported PFAS lies in. It varies depending on that. It's actually worth maybe later on that you read through these slides, take some time to seriously review it, because it will give you an idea of the required thresholds, etc. Next slide, please. So this obligation to report is actually also with the manufacturers, those producing PFAS or products containing PFAS in Canada. It also applies to users, so organizations which are using PFAS to manufacture other products. Naturally, like all regulations, there are exemptions to this scenario as well. So if there are any individuals importing PFAS and personal use items, then there is an exemption. If it's intended for use in a laboratory for analysis or for scientific research or as a laboratory standard, there is an exemption. And also, of course, if the products are already regulated under any other laws, for example, for pesticides, other kinds of biocides, etc., then naturally those are also exempt from the Canadian PFAS reporting obligation. Next slide, please. So coming to the most important part of everything that we have discussed, the time to act is now. Because there is an industry impact, obviously. Non-compliance could result in product recalls, hefty fines, and loss of market access. There is also a reputational risk. Consumers are increasingly aware of PFAS and they demand transparency. So being compliant is not just a legal requirement, but also a competitive advantage. So what is the solution? The solution is that we start assessing the supply chains proactively and now, so that one can already understand whether their product is in non-compliance. They can reformulate the products and stay informed about upcoming changes on a regular basis. Now, you see that there are different kinds of regulations on PFAS in different kinds of regions, so it can sometimes get a little bit overwhelming and a little bit challenging to stay on top of all of these requirements, because of which you would need a simple solution that would be the answer or the prayer to all your problems. But more about that in the upcoming slides. For now, thank you so much for paying attention. Apologies if there were any disturbances, you know, life happens. But for now, I will pass the presentation to my colleague, Shivangi, and she will take you guys through EU battery regulation and also the persistent organic pollutants. Thank you.
Thanks, Yogita. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I will be discussing the next two topics on our agenda, the new EU battery regulation and the EU POP regulation. So let's start. Taking stock of the new EU battery requirements, the material compliance view. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of what we will be covering today on the EU battery regulation. Introduction to the new EU battery regulation, the key updates that have happened in material restrictions, introduction of CE marking, and the labeling requirements. Next slide, please. So the new EU battery regulation came out in 2023, and it replaces the 2006 directive. It focuses on environmental, social, and economic sustainability. It came in effect from February 18, 2024, this year. Why it matters? It matters because it tackles environmental and ethical issues throughout the battery life cycle and promotes a sustainable supply chain to help achieve EU climate objectives. Next slide, please. So now coming to the key updates in material restrictions. So this is the table taken out from the regulation itself. In column 1, we have the substances, and in column 2, we have the conditions. So mercury is restricted to only 0.0005% in all kinds of batteries. Cadmium and lead are restricted to 0.002% and 0.01% in portable batteries, respectively. Non-portable batteries are permitted to contain cadmium and lead, but they must be clearly marked with a cadmium and lead label. Next slide, please. So the CE marking under the new EU battery regulation. So the regulation introduces stricter requirements for CE marking, making it a mandatory compliance indicator for all battery types. The documents required are a conformity assessment, a technical file, and a declaration of conformity. The placement of the CE mark must be in a way that it is visible on the battery and also on its packaging and the documentation. Next slide, please. So now coming to the labeling requirements. So labels are needed for performance and sustainability. For example, energy capacity, charging cycles, lifespan of the battery, etc. For the hazard identification, for example, the lead and cadmium labels that we discussed in the last slide. For end-of-life guidance, like proper recycling symbols and disposal instructions. And digital battery passport for electric vehicle and industrial batteries, like material composition, recycling information, and life cycle traceability. So that was a brief overview of the EU battery regulation. And next slide, please. So now quickly jumping on to the next topic for today, the EU POP regulation. A brief overview of persistent organic pollutants, POP, leveraging automation to stay compliant. Next slide. So this is the overview of what we'll be covering today on EU POP, definitions and characteristics, EU regulations on POP, and restricted and prohibited substances under the POP regulation. Next slide, please. So persistent organic pollutants, commonly known as POPs, are hazardous chemicals that remain in the environment for long periods of time, accumulating through the food chain and threatening both human health and ecosystems. As global chemical sales are expected to reach 6.6 trillion euros by 2030, the introduction of numerous new chemicals and materials into the market increases the risk that many could eventually become POPs, and that could amplify the threat that they pose. The key characteristics are that they last really long in the environment, they bioaccumulate in food chains and have a long-range transport potential. What you see in this picture are the POPs that are called the Dirty Dozen, the 12 most dangerous POPs that we have, and these were the first ones that got regulated. Next slide, please. So now the EU regulations on POPs. So we have the Stockholm Convention. So it is a global treaty adopted in 2001 and entered into force in 2004 with the purpose to safeguard human health and the environment from highly harmful chemicals that persist in the environment for years. The convention aims to eliminate and/or reduce POPs, which have a potential of causing devastating effects such as cancer and reproductive disorders. Now, the EU POP regulation implements the Stockholm Convention within the European Union. It establishes a list of prohibited and restricted POPs that we'll be discussing in the next slide, and governs their production, use, waste disposal, and recycling. The regulation aims to safeguard human health and the environment by controlling the release and presence of these harmful chemicals. Next slide, please. So this is the categorization we have. The first category is prohibited substances. So these substances are completely prohibited for production, use, and marketing within the EU. The ban applies to all products containing them, except in cases where specific or critical exemptions are granted. And these are some of the key examples: pesticides such as DDT, industrial chemicals such as PCBs, which were widely used in electrical equipment, and bioproducts like dioxins and furans. The second category is the restricted substances. So these substances are regulated with specific limitations and conditions. So their production, use, or market availability may only be permitted under exemptions for critical applications or within defined concentration thresholds. And these are some of the examples: perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFOS. It was widely used in firefighting foams, textile and leather treatment, and paper and packaging industry. Hexabromochlorododecane, HBCDD, was commonly used as a flame retardant and was also applied to fabrics in furniture and textiles to make them fire resistant. So that concludes my overview of the EU POP regulation. I hope I was able to clearly explain the technical aspects and key points of both of these regulations. Thank you all again. And now I will pass it over to Peter.
Thank you, Yogita and Shivangi. As you all have heard already in this session, legislation is moving. We discussed legislation like the Canadian one, which had a timeline of 6 months, EU POP, where it's already been going for a year and a half, but the EU can move slowly. But based on other things going on, like increased REACH restrictions and indeed inspections at country level, we're expecting EU POP to take a higher focus as enforcement grows throughout the EU. So all of these legislation, even the battery legislation, have timetables, and those timetables will hit at various times. What is clear is that timetables are changing, and in some cases extremely short, and others are 6 years away. And navigating that can be a tough process. We have people who specialize in it and a wider team in IPOINT who study all related regulatory things and look at what topics might be crucial for the future. For both ourselves and our customers, sometimes we decide they're not of concern, others we will hurriedly produce a new solution to help. For example, battery passports will not be in place for some time, but we are looking at the possibilities around supplying data to a battery passport application, because a lot of the key data in a battery passport is to do with the material compliance of that battery. But if we follow the next slide, please. I was just going to keep this to 2025, but earlier this week, there was yet another ECHA update. In this case, it was a partial update. DBP, or dibutyl phthalate, which has been on various controlled and restricted lists for some time, has now been extended in its danger level, if you like. They've added endocrine disrupting properties for the environment, and they have recommended the Annex 14 REACH authorization is also amended to fit. So you can be certain that Annex 14, there will be an authorization change coming up probably next year, but if it works slowly or there's an EU election, possibly it would go to the year after. But we have a change to the SVHC list, which is just a small detail, but it will have a knock-on effect on the authorization. So if you are using that and there is a risk of environmental pollution, then be aware you may have to make sure that that use is properly authorized very soon. And the next slide, please. So looking forward to 2025, there are some key dates, and some of these are very fixed and others are a little more open. So I'd like to cover them in a little bit of detail, not a lot because we haven't got an enormous amount of time. I'd love to talk about some of these for hours, but I can't. On the 27th of January, the first deadline for the EU Taxonomy Directive, where people have to start reporting substances of concern and substances of very high concern, will hit for certain companies. On the 29th of January, just 2 days later, as you heard earlier, the Canadian PFAS reporting starts. In not entirely clear whether that will be a start or a deadline. We would expect enforcement to follow quite quickly. The Canadian import and export and border people are very good at inspecting chemicals coming across their borders, so I would not be surprised to hear of enforcement on this within 3 months of that date. You have to know not just where the PFAS is, but how much of it is that you import or use in Canada. And it's Canada-wide. A lot of previous Canadian legislation, particularly in the in EPR area, have been about recycling fees, which are province-wide. This is all provinces, all Canada reporting, and it's not the first one. You'll hear about another one in a second. Also coming up is the US EPA PFAS reporting. Due to the difficulties in reporting, and there are lots of them, not the least of which is you have to look at any accidents involving PFAS in factories dating back over 10 years, plus usage over that time, which will be very difficult to report, and the fact that the EPA keep changing their lists, has been extended. The end date, and it will vary depending on your company, is now up to middle or late 2026, and it may well slip again with the introduction of the new government. When President Trump takes over, some of his cabinet ministers are not keen on restrictions, so this may extend further. So you need to be aware it could happen on schedule, but it could delay. It's not too late to start, but you should definitely need to start looking at the US EPA regulations in particular. Again, this is a national one. You heard from Yogita that lots of states have their own restrictions. This isn't a restriction, it's a reporting mandate. You have to report. There are no taxes involved yet, no import duties yet. It's just a reporting mandate, but you do have to do it under the US regulations. From the 4th of Feb onwards, depending on your company, CSRD will hit in Europe. Again, this is reporting on substances of concern and substances of very high concern. In April, as I mentioned earlier, the EMRT, the Extended Mineral Reporting Template, the second of the two responsible mineral templates, will be extended. Instead of just being 4 extra minerals, they're going to add copper, natural graphite, lithium, and nickel. Lithium and nickel are very important in an increasing infrastructure where more and more people are relying on electronics and battery operated items. They have become a critical mineral in their own right. So people want to know lots about their supply chains. The need for just restricting it from 1 or 2 countries has now become a worldwide issue. So the EMRT will be extended. From July onwards, PFAS in packaging, the US states will expand out, will be a lot more prevalent. They are linked to extended producer responsibility or EPR regulations. If you have PFAS in your packaging and it goes into the waste cycle rather than recycling, there is a high risk that it will pollute rivers or the sea or indeed any other parts of the environment. And there have been several farms in the eastern US where the farmers can no longer grow cattle or sell the cattle that comes from that because there is too much accumulated PFAS in the soil, and basically they're out of business and looking for compensation. PFAS is big. It's not just packaging, it'll be everywhere. Expect it to become in the news more and more. Forever Chemicals is a nice tagline for newsreaders. They will continue to use it. Coming soon, again, this is the Canadian government, not province level. They want a report on all plastics in packaging and in products. This is done again to the Canadian government. It will be a phased approach over 3+ years. And depending on your product, you may not have to report for 2 years, except of course if it's also packaged in plastic, in which case you would need to report faster. They are concentrating in a first phase on anything that can be touched by children or is frequently touched. So in many ways, it's similar to some of the California Proposition 65 directive in that they're looking at things which have high access. Same with the Canadian PFAS. It's all about, can children touch it? Is it on a car seat? Is it in textiles where people have a higher risk? And that applies to plastics as well. So they want to know all the plastics which are in or will become part of the waste stream in Canada, to look eventually, one imagines, at recycling targets and recovery targets. And last but not least, and I put December here because we don't actually know, because they've delayed it twice already, EUDR, the deforestation regulation, has now been delayed to the end of 2025. In practice, there are a lot of arguments going on in the EU Parliament about the effectiveness. Some people are saying that the recent changes in its implementation have made it useless. Others want it to become stronger, others weaker. So don't be very surprised if this does stretch into 2026. But if you have anything that is covered by this, whether it's anything, for example, including rubber, where they've knocked down natural forests to place rubber trees, or anything with a wood content, or anything else which would contribute to deforestation in the named areas, you do need to monitor it. You have a little bit more time, but it won't last forever. You do have to do it. So some high-level topics to look at. And the next slide, please. Just a quick view on how we can help. All the regulations you've heard of today, EU pulp, PFAS, even Canadian PFAS, REACH, SVHCs, everything. It helps to be able to monitor them in a real time. It helps to follow the frameworks and the rules on a country by country or province by province basis. We at IPOINT have predefined rule groups tailored to these regulations, including the ones we've already talked about today, which allow organizations to quickly adapt to regulatory and list changes without having to develop custom solutions from scratch for each new regulation. This helps with simplifying documentation for audits and for reporting, and where necessary, and it will become more necessary, for generating accurate reports to the EU authorities, or indeed an EU skip declaration to the ECHA database. It will help you on guidance, on looking for low-hanging fruit, on things which are easy to remove. Look for the high concentration PFAS, or the high selling items with PFAS, and change those first. Our software and its associated rule groups can help you collect and analyze this data. And the next slide, please. And as I close, just to give you a quick view, and it's in the background, these are just some of the lists that we covered today. Everything from EU REACH to the Railway International Substance List, to automotive specific lists, global lists that have been around a long time, such as the SIN list, and many others, including conflict minerals, California Proposition 65. And as a quick highlight in the middle here, we will be launching a compliance newsletter next quarter with more news and updates. We want to keep you informed of what's happening in the market and warn you about what's coming. And I would like to take the time to thank everyone for listening, and go on to the next slide, please.
Perfect. Thank you. Also from my side, to our experts, but also, of course, to all participants. You will receive the recording and also the Q&A session afterwards. As we are already perfectly in time, we will just send that out later. In the meantime, I already said we would love for you to take the survey, but also appreciate it if you would follow us on LinkedIn, just to stay connected and also stay up to date for more events and also information. And with that, I wish a happy Friday to everyone, and thanks for the attention and your time.